Hey, everybody. We've made it through another week. It is Friday, May 2nd. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. And sometimes we do it from OH.
I-O.
Ohio. I am taping this. Well, technically, Jill, I'm taping this from Covington, Kentucky, across the river. That's where the airport is. But I spent the day in Ohio on Thursday. We got some upcoming content coming to all of you. You might be familiar by now that we have a partnership with Procter & Gamble. And we're in with their group that does disaster relief, Tide Loads of Hope. We were doing a prep shoot yesterday. And Jill, we happen to have two of our team members, Mo News producers, Molly and Whitney, who both live in Ohio. We're stretched across a number of states here at Mo News.
Well, Moshe, that's another thing that makes Mo News different from traditional media outlets. One of the big criticisms of traditional media outlets is that most of their staff is in Los Angeles, California, Washington, D.C., and not as much the heartland, middle America.
Yeah, there's a political bias issue among the media. There's also an elitism bias issue in the media. For the most part, decision makers, again, on the West Coast or in New York or D.C. Jill, I should mention, we actually have a third Ohioan, Brooke, who handles sales for us. So we have three Ohio. We got one person in Michigan. We got one person in Wisconsin. I think we're equal Midwest, Ohio Valley, and East Coast in terms of our split here at Mo News. Take pride in that here.
We kind of have an Ohio bias.
I think we might have too many people in it. No, I definitely can't say that while I record here and wait for me to fly back to New York. I kid. I mean, the majority of the media, like 90% of the decision makers, are in Manhattan. So I think that distinguishes us. And so it was great to be here. And for those of you curious, the locals, as to whether I had a certain Cincinnati delicacy, stay tuned for what I'm eating this weekend.
By the way, the only people who would be concerned that you have too many Ohio employees are people who live in Michigan. And luckily, I went to Michigan, and one of our producers, Lauren, is from Michigan.
Yeah, no, and by the way, one of our Ohio resident producers, Whitney, is from Michigan. And you married a guy who went to Ohio State, Jill. So it's a very complicated situation between the states in your household.
Yeah, so we're all represented, is the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. We got a few states. We still have about 40 states to go, candidly, but we'll get there as Mo News grows.
All right, now to the headlines. A shakeup at the White House. President Trump gives Mike Waltz the boot as National Security Advisor. The backstory and what's next.
He sort of booted him to another job, Jill. We'll explain, and we'll also tell you how many jobs Marco Rubio currently has at the White House.
Meanwhile, Senate Republicans block a bill that would have rebuked President Trump's tariffs. A handful of Republicans did join Democrats to try to send a message to the president. We'll tell you which ones.
And we'll tell you what Apple is now saying about the tariffs.
Travel headaches. Newark Airport hit with delays in part because of staffing shortages, and officials say we all might want to get used to this for a while. The McRecession hits fast food chains, except for one. And Moshe, your favorite, In-N-Out, coming to new states.
Gradually making its way across America, Jill. But we'll tell you why their expansion is always so limited.
The Tony nominations are out, and there's one controversy. Is Broadway getting to Hollywood? And stay tuned for a Desperate Housewives reboot, what we know about it. Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we're watching, reading, and eating. All right, musical chairs at the White House after 100 days in office, where we are now seeing perhaps the first real fallout from Signalgate. President Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, and one of his top deputies, Alex Wong, stepped down on Thursday, just about a month after the Signal chat fallout. Stepped down, by the way, is a diplomatic way of saying that President Trump told Waltz that he was done doing that job. We learned all about this on Thursday morning, but in a surprising turn of events, a few hours later, the president announced that he was nominating Waltz to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Trump announced Waltz's new gig on Truth Social, saying that Waltz had, quote, worked hard to put our nation's interests first, taking his place for now as the interim NSA Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So Moshe, you hinted to this at the top. In addition to Secretary of State and now interim NSA, Rubio is also serving as the active head of USAID and also the interim archivist of the United States.
So that is 1, 2, 3, 4 jobs that Marco Rubio has. Though I'm told he only gets the salary for a Secretary of State job. All those interim gigs that You don't get to collect multiple paychecks there. That was one of the popular questions, Jill, we got on Instagram. I don't know if there's a bonus in there for him or something, but as he eliminated USAID, Rubio picked up USAID. Then, like, Trump had an issue with the archivist because remember the whole classified records thing he had going on. Well, he wanted to fire the archivist because he was like upset at the archivist. He's like, you know what, Marco, you take that on as well. And then the Mike Waltz thing, and he's like, you know, Marco, can you also do this job? And it appears Marco said, sure, boss.
Moshe, I guess it's job security, right? I mean, even if he gets fired from one or two of his jobs, he still has a couple left.
Still has a couple left. By the way, Jill, it's not just Marco Rubio. Like Kash Patel, the FBI director, for a while was also made head of the ATF. By the way, the FBI, that's a big job. And they're like, you know, also throw in the ATF while you're at it. Now, he has since lost the ATF gig. He's back to just being FBI. But this is the thing, you know, Trump's like, I like what you're doing. Can you also do this? Can you also do this?
The State Department spokesperson, Tammy Bruce, caught off guard Thursday by the news that Trump had tapped her boss, Marco Rubio, to serve as the interim national security advisor. Here's a bit of her exchange with a reporter asking for her reaction about it.
The president has just written on Truth Social that Mike Waltz is going to become the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
Well, there you go.
Fabulous. And in addition to that, he says that in the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as national security advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Do you know how long he's going to be serving in both roles?
It is clear that I just heard this from you.
So she made light of it, saying, the miracle of modern technology, because the president had made that announcement on social media. Now to the backstory here. Immediately following that leaked Signal chat controversy last month, White House officials debated whether Waltz should resign right away. If you remember, his team created that Signal chat with more than a dozen members of Trump's national security team to talk about a U.S. military strike on the Houthis in Yemen. Somehow, they accidentally added Atlantic editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg. But at the time, during the height of the scandal, President Trump reportedly told aides that he didn't want to give Democrats and the media a win by pushing Waltz out. He now apparently believes that enough time has passed to frame this as kind of a reorganization. Trump previously stood by Waltz. He called him a, quote, a good man who had learned a lesson. No other Trump officials in the group chat were fired in the direct aftermath, making this the first major shakeup. But Moshe, the question remains, why Waltz and not Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who actually sent the sensitive information? So why is Waltz facing more backlash?
So, first of all, a new day starts today, so it's unclear how long Hegseth will be in the role. But so far, Trump, despite some of the scandals Hegseth has had here, appears to continue to have confidence in him. Remember, Hegseth shared the details as to how we were going to bomb the Houthis, the planes being used, the weaponry going to be used in that Signal chat. Mike Waltz, well, his team made the mistake of adding the journalist. And also, remember, he gave us the fist bump, fire, U.S. flag emoji trio, which I think is a great trio to indicate support for something after he found out that, we had finished the operation. But nonetheless, this really boils down to Trump and his feelings about people. He likes Hegseth's style. Hegseth is a TV guy. There are people around him who feel that Mike Waltz hasn't been sufficiently out there. You also have reporting now that Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, really soured on Waltz after the Signal Gate leak, that it was an embarrassment here. Jill, I should note that at the cabinet meeting on Wednesday, a day before Waltz found out he was losing the job, he was sitting at the cabinet meeting and he also lavished praise on Trump, like a number of other cabinet officials. But he, under the table, was on his phone. What app was he on? Signal. A Reuters photographer caught Mike Waltz, and they zoomed in on the phone. It doesn't appear that Waltz has one of those shields on your phone where you can't see stuff from angles. The Reuters photographer zoomed in. You could see that he was Signal chatting with, and he had recently talked to Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, Witkoff, were all in his sort of recent messages on Signal. And we know that these officials continue to use the Signal app. Nonetheless, not a great look optically. Not saying this all happened because of that, but nonetheless, it does appear that Waltz was having some issues internally. There are people in more of the MAGA wing of the party who are more isolationist. And Waltz is a more traditional foreign policy Republican, more hawkish on handling Iran militarily. more supportive of Ukraine. He's tried to stay in line here in terms of Trump's positions, but that other isolationist wing, the J.D. Vance wing, definitely not in line with Mike Waltz. Never felt that he was loyal enough. A conservative social media influencer, Laura Loomer, who actually carries some weight with Trump, had visited recently, and she came up with a list of people who she felt were insufficiently MAGA or insufficiently loyal to Trump, including a number of people Waltz had put on the National Security Council. And so ultimately, those people were pushed out. So it was really only a matter of time here. Trump doesn't like to be embarrassed, but he also doesn't want to have to concede to Democrats or the media saying you should fire this guy. So he waited approximately a month to do this, and then he put him at the UN. And we should note, the UN ambassador, not a bad job. Remember, Trump had nominated Elise Stefanik to do that, but then there was this feeling on Capitol Hill that Republicans didn't have enough votes in the House, so basically sent her back to Capitol Hill, was like, yeah, I'm rescinding the nomination. You go back to being a congresswoman. So Waltz goes over to the UN position now. And you do have a foreign policy role. It is prominent, but you're not involved in the day-to-day. You're not in the White House. You're not in all those decisions that are being made typically. And so, for Waltz, going from a security advisor, where you're in the Oval Office, kind of adjudicating differences between the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State in the ear of the president all the time. At the UN, it's going to be more challenging. And so even if it was sold by Trump as sort of like, you've done a great job, now you go do this, it's a demotion, let's be honest.
Right. And remember, Waltz gave up a pretty safe Republican congressional seat in Florida to take the job of NSA. So he's probably not thrilled getting that demotion.
I don't think you can say probably not thrilled. I'm sure.
He's miserable.
He's like, no, I got to go. But you know what's cool, actually? The UN ambassador gets this really cool apartment in New York City. Jill, you were there when you interviewed the last UN ambassador.
One word: views.
It's one of the unique things you get as UN ambassador is like a very plush apartment.
It is just walls of windows. It is an amazing apartment. As somebody who lived in numerous studios in New York City, I had apartment envy.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe Jill, you don't want to be national security advisor. Maybe you actually would no, UN ambassador, that'd be great for me because those are some digs. And
I could stay in New York.
There you go. For you, it's a promotion.
Seriously. Moshe, a lot of questions, though, like who is President Trump going to pick for the NSA position permanently? As you mentioned, Waltz was generally more hawkish. He had traditional Republican views, less of the MAGA wing. So depending on who he picks, this could be a big victory for the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens side of MAGA. There's some reporting from Axios that Chief of Staff Susie Wiles started to collect names to replace Waltz, but kept the talks strictly under wraps. And not that he doesn't have enough on his plate, but the Trump envoy, Steve Witkoff, has been floated in some reports. But apparently he said he is not interested in the job.
Right, Steve Witkoff, real estate developer, no national security background, but friend
None.
of Trump.
No international background.
Maybe he's traveled, Jill. He's traveled abroad in the past, but not in terms of international diplomacy. But that would put him equal to Rubio because right now he's envoy related to Hamas, Ukraine, Russia, and Iran. So if he got that NSA gig, that would also be 4, and then Rubio would go back down to 3. So then Witkoff would have more than Rubio in that case. Ultimately, though, it looks like Witkoff is I got enough jobs for you, Mr. President.
To which Marco Rubio is like, I hear you. I've got enough jobs too. Some other names, though, on that list: Stephen Miller, Sebastian Gorka, Richard Grenell, and even Marco Rubio, which I think going from Secretary of State to NSA, is that a demotion or is that on par?
It depends, Jill, because if he follows in the footsteps of one Henry Kissinger, 50 years ago, Henry Kissinger was the last guy to serve as both NSA and Secretary of State for Richard Nixon. At that time, Kissinger, one of the most powerful foreign policy voices, national security voices in American history. And so if he somehow got that dual mandate, NSA and Secretary of State, a la Kissinger, that would be a pretty big deal. But, ultimately, as a cabinet secretary, you're running a whole department. As NSA, you're sort of the arbiter for the president. You're the honest broker of policy debates. You are overseeing the principals committee of the National Security Council. So you're bringing them all into the Situation Room and kind of walking through various things. So it, really depends, in this administration. maybe NSA would be better. You would have more FaceTime with the president as opposed to being over there in Foggy Bottom there in DC. But, we can debate that another day, depending on how this goes. Now, interestingly, some of the names that you listed there, Jill, very loyal MAGA with a lot of influence with the president here. Rubio is another one who sort of MAGA views skeptically, like he can never quite win them over, because they also view him as a traditional Republican who has come to Trump's views on a number of things, but they don't quite trust Marco Rubio. Remember, Rubio really wants to run for president again, so he really wants to win that wing of the party over. So he's been trying to be super loyal, super in line with everything Trump is doing here. We'll see what happens. Just for those keeping score at home, Trump had 4 national security advisors in his first term. Mike Waltz was number 5. He lasted 100 days, 101 days. For being generous here. So now you got Rubio's interim, then lead to the 6th national security advisor. It does not require Senate confirmation. So Trump can basically name whoever he wants to that position. We should say that typical presidents go to 1 to 2 advisors per term. Trump, of course, had 4 in his first, and now he's on his 2nd already in his first year of his 2nd term. So we'll see what happens. You did hear from a number of Democrats yesterday who were like, what about Pete Hegseth? He is the one who shared these details. There's really concern at the Pentagon about just chaos at the Pentagon, including the fact that he had to fire a bunch of the people that he hired, leak investigations, questions as to what's going on. So to your point earlier about Pete Hegseth, unclear how long he lasts there. But so far, the president's remained loyal to him. But Jill, as we know, you wake up, you're Mike Waltz. On Thursday, he woke up. He did some media. He appeared on Fox talking about his position, how great the president is, and then found out in the media like an hour later that he's done in that job. So you have the loyalty until you don't have the loyalty. And by the way, that cuts across multiple administrations. But it will be interesting to see who he goes with in the sort of next iteration of NSA and what that means, especially as we've got a lot of national security issues to deal with around the world.
One other quick DC thing that we were watching. President Trump is releasing his budget for 2026 today. It's the first official indication of how he wants to fund the government. It's his outline of priorities. Of course, these things go back and forth a bunch and don't pass on the first go-arounds.
And haven't passed in years. We just have what they call these continuing resolutions on Capitol Hill to just keep funding things. But, budgets will be interesting. It'll make some headlines. Turn to our Instagram page later today for context on what those headlines actually mean.
Time for the speed read from Politico. Apple announced Thursday that tariffs on goods coming into the United States will add nearly $1 billion to Apple's costs this quarter, despite President Trump's decision to spare key electronics from the new import taxes. The estimate from the iPhone maker comes as firms are scrambling to respond to Trump's tariff strategy. It's disrupting supply chains and raising a lot of uncertainty about consumer demand. Apple said it was shifting production of iPhones headed for the United States away from China, which, as we have been reporting, is facing the highest tariffs, more than 150%. The majority of iPhones sold in the U.S. in the coming months will be made in India. Still, the costs from tariffs will add up to about $1 billion a quarter at the current rates. Apple CEO Tim Cook also says that the company is expected to move production of almost all of its iPads, Macs, Apple Watches, and AirPods to Vietnam. So India and Vietnam is where most of their products headed for the United States are going to be made. And it comes as there is a growing concern on Capitol Hill as well about the impact of tariffs. An effort to kill those sweeping global tariffs failed in the Senate on Wednesday. Senators voted 49-49 to reject the national emergency that Trump used to impose tariffs. Senators voted 49-49 to reject the national emergency that the president used to impose those tariffs. 3 Republicans joined Democrats in rejecting the tariffs. Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Rand Paul of Kentucky.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the reaction on Capitol Hill to this. There's been a lot of concern among some Republicans. Rand Paul, one of the most prominent critics. And so it was a pretty close Senate vote, 49-49, tie there, if you're curious as to where those other 2 votes were. One was Mitch McConnell, another Republican who's been critical of the tariffs, but he was just missing for the vote. Nonetheless, even if it had passed, Jill, largely symbolic, because the U.S. House, the Republican majority there, has made clear they will block any resolution to block the tariffs. They remain very supportive of Trump, regardless of concerns about what it's doing economically. They want to give him a shot here on the tariffs. But over in the Senate, you do tend to see at least a handful of Republicans willing to break with Trump here. The Senate actually tried to do a procedural matter to ensure they could vote on this again in the future. And that one actually also tied, but J.D. Vance showed up to that vote to break the tie because the vice president breaks ties in the Senate to ensure they can't vote on that measure again. So it's unclear exactly what would happen again here in the Senate. We'll watch reaction. We told you yesterday on the podcast, and we've been following very closely the fact that we could start to see shortages of things on the shelves in stores as soon as later this month into June, July, and August. So if the China tariffs really start to have an impact on consumers, they're going to call their members of Congress, who will then call the folks at the White House. So we'll see here how long this lasts and what happens next. But, Rand Paul is one of those Republicans that's always sort of stood his ground, regardless of whether it's popular in his party or not. And he was quoted after this vote as saying, most Republicans are just going along with it, but many of them are quietly still on the other side of these tariffs. They just aren't willing to say anything yet. But I think if we went through another quarter of negative growth or another scare in the marketplace, I think there's going to be visible voices here against the tariffs. So we shall see if Rand Paul is right here, Jill. But I wouldn't be surprised if he is, because at the end of the day, Trump doesn't need to run for re-election again. But all these Republicans on Capitol Hill, all the House members do next year, and a third of the Senate does.
Okay, now to massive flight delays at Newark Airport. From CBS News, Newark Liberty International Airport hit with delays again, this time due to construction and a staffing shortage. So Thursday marked yet another day of major travel headaches and delays at the airport, where arriving flights were at one point delayed by an average of 5 hours. The airport claims it's being caused by air traffic controller related issues. Again, also some construction and equipment problems. The FAA also said this week's delays were caused by staffing shortages at an air traffic control center in Philadelphia, which guides some air traffic at Newark. It comes after the agency relocated a group of controllers there from New York last year in an effort to just help staffing overall. The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, called the problems, quote, cracks in the system. The FAA says it is actively investigating.
Yeah, he announced a plan yesterday to try to get air traffic controllers to stay longer before retiring, to move controllers into harder to staff locations like Albuquerque. He named some other locations there. He said he plans to offer bonuses to do so. He also wants to create more opportunities in the civilian airspace for military air traffic controllers. Jill, this has been a big deal. We've had a shortage for a number of years here. This goes back to the firing by Ronald Reagan of the air traffic controllers, and we've never quite recovered since then. They retire at an earlier age, and so, Duffy really is trying to take this very seriously, especially in the aftermath of that collision in D.C. between the helicopter and the plane. Jill, I posted this on the premium account over the weekend, but the New York Times had an investigation into this, and they found very clearly that the chopper pilot, the woman who was flying that helicopter, had an instructor with her, and according to the final audio, he was telling her to, bring the chopper down, go to the left, and they never made that left turn, leading to the collision there. So it doesn't appear to have been as much of an air traffic controller issue in that DCA case, though nonetheless, you did have a controller there who was managing a couple things at the same time. So right now, the FAA still falls short about 3,000 controllers nationwide. Right now, Duffy is hoping that over these next 4 years, we can get closer to fuller staffing. Look for more headlines there. There's also been talk of involving AI as a component here, updating the system. Some of the air traffic control systems are decades old, behind the technology that they're using in other countries. That is the situation with air traffic controllers. As far as Newark Airport's concerned, definitely double check, your flights right now, because Newark keeps having issues. And I'm hearing murmurs, Jill, that it's a combination of things, including the technology, the radar, and the very systems that they use at the airport.
All right, now to the economy from Axios. Call it the McRecession. Low and middle income consumers are increasingly shying away from fast food restaurants like McDonald's, a sign that people are pinching pennies amid recession fears. The number of low-income consumers visiting U.S. fast food restaurants was down nearly double digits in the year's first 3 months compared to 2024. Visits from middle-income consumers fell nearly as much. Concerns about job losses and fears about price hikes from those tariffs we mentioned have fueled what economists are seeing more and more of: pessimism about the future, and that has translated into fewer people coming through the door at McDonald's and other fast food restaurants. So McDonald's CEO saying one way the trend is manifesting, people are skipping breakfast or they are choosing to eat at home.
And it's not just McDonald's, Jill. They're seeing it at Starbucks, slight decrease there. Domino's is saying that they're seeing consumers actually get away from delivery and actually go to carry out to try to save a few bucks. The Wingstop CEO says he's seeing a decrease here. Chipotle also saw sales drop. Now, one exception to the rule, and it might be because of their Crunchwrap Supreme, Jill, Taco Bell. Sales there at Taco Bell up. They're crediting the expansion of the Lux boxes or Lux boxes. A $5 Lux box, we'll call it a Lux box. Lux box becoming a massive win with low-income consumers. Is it? I mean, the question is, you got the Lux box, but like, is it the cheesy gordita crunch? Is it the Mexican pizza? Is it the Crunchwrap Supreme? Mo News community, you tell us. Because right now, Taco Bell, everybody else is down and Taco Bell is up.
And sticking with fast food news from USA Today, In-N-Out Burger appears set to open at least 7 new locations in 4 states. It is continuing to expand beyond its California roots, in recent years opening stores in Colorado, Texas, and Idaho.
So of these new locations, 4 more go in California. The 3 other states they'll be adding stores in: Arizona, Colorado, and Washington, seeing new locations. No timetable here. We should note that they will be adding, we don't have exact dates, 5 locations in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, that's a big deal because In-N-Out has been very precise and very strategic in how it expands. The main reason is In-N-Out is very much about quality and fresh ingredients. They don't use freezers. They don't use microwaves. They don't use heat lamps. Their stores must be located within trucking range, about 300 miles of the distribution centers that they have in California, in Texas. That's where the ingredients in the ground chuck are prepared. So that limits the options here. So In-N-Out opened in California back in the late 40s. They didn't leave the state for 44 years, finally getting into Vegas in the 90s. And so now they have like 400 or so locations. They got Arizona, they got Colorado, they got Idaho, they got Nevada, Texas, Oregon. But ultimately here, they're going to be jumping into Tennessee. So that's why, when you wonder on the East Coast, like, when are we getting an In-N-Out? Not anytime soon. You're going to have to go back to the Crunchwrap Supreme. That's everywhere. Because Taco Bell uses like freezers and heat lamps and such.
Mosh, tell me more.
Jill's family, not a big Taco Bell family, I take it.
We are a big Chipotle family.
Got it.
Actually. And Chipotle, speaking of ingredients, pretty clean and good ingredients there, I think.
Listen,
so
when it's fast food, you're
think.
grading on a scale. You're like, listen, there's nothing healthier in life than Chipotle. I will say this about Chipotle. I didn't go to Chipotle for a number of years. And I used to like frequent it in kind of college and afterwards. I didn't realize how salty their chips were. I was like, oh my God, these chips are crazy salty.
Isn't that just all chips?
I think they maybe it was the location I was at.
Can I have some chips with my salt, please? Thanks. From the Mo newsletter, the nominations for the 78th Annual Tony Awards were announced Thursday. Cole Escola will face off against George Clooney for the award for the Best Leading Actor in a Play. Escola wrote and starred in the ahistorical farce Oh, Mary, and is the first non-binary actor to be nominated for the category. Clooney is playing journalist Edward R. Murrow in Good Night and Good Luck. Oh, Mary is also nominated for Best Play, where it will face off against John Proctor is the Villain, which is a buzzy new play that focuses on a high school English class reading of The Crucible through a Me Too era lens. That should be interesting. Moshe, one controversy here, the nominations are dominated by some of the biggest names in Hollywood.
Yeah, Broadway really has a bunch of stars right now. So you mentioned Clooney. The acting categories have Daniel Day-Kim, Harry Lennox are both up for actor in a leading role. For actress, Mia Farrow is nominated. Sarah Snook from Succession is nominated for her role in Picture of Dorian Gray. Sadie Sink of Stranger Things is nominated for her role in John Proctor is the Villain. And then you have additional names, Darren Criss and Bob Odenkirk, also nominated. You also then had additional stars, bold-faced names from Hollywood, who right now are performing, who didn't get nominations. That includes Denzel Washington and Jake Gyllenhaal, Nick Jonas, David Hyde Pierce, all not nominated here. So notable for you Tony watchers. The Tonys coming up in just a few weeks here. They will be hosted by Cynthia Erivo of Wicked on June 8th. But it does come, Jill, they did sort of a state of the play for Broadway tickets, and they keep getting more expensive. Sometimes the cheapest tickets now, you can't get a ticket for less than $250.
Right. So if you want to take your family between the tickets and getting there and eating, you're into the $1,000 range.
Yeah, it's like going to like a big NFL game. I mean, you could probably even do that for cheaper, or NBA game. So one of the issues that I think Broadway is facing is the cost right now.
And finally, from Variety, a new iteration of the smash ABC series Desperate Housewives is in the works. The project is currently called Wisteria Lane. Kerry Washington is signed on to executive produce. The show is set around a group of 5 very different friends and sometimes frenemies who all live on a picture-perfect cul-de-sac called Wisteria Lane. On the surface, the Wisteria neighbors are living the dream, beautiful homes, gorgeous families, shiny SUVs in the driveway. But behind those white picket fences and smiling Instagram posts are secrets, Moshe. The original set before social media. So I'm curious how they're going to work social media into the equation.
Chill. Eva Longoria a while ago was asked by Andy Cohen on Real Housewives about a reboot, and she goes, "I can't sleep with any more people on that street. I've slept with every person on that street," as did Nicolette Sheridan. So.
It's true, like, she has.
It doesn't sound like anyone from the original cast will be back. Kerry Washington, I'm curious. I was digging around. She is executive producing. I wonder what role, if she'll put herself on camera there as part of this reboot. And so no word there. You know, if you look at social media, some people are excited. And then some people are like, no, don't ruin the old show by doing this. But, you know, it was like a thing in that moment when it aired. So no surprise they're trying to bring it back and squeezing some more juice from that lemon, orange, grapefruit. What citrus do you squeeze more juice from?
Well, they all hold apples. So I feel like that's the better...
Wrong fruit metaphor, Moshe.
Yeah.
Dumb Moshe.
But it did spawn the Housewives.
Squeeze more juice from that apple. Yes.
That doesn't really work.
That doesn't.
But of course, what pertains to me is that it spawned the Real Housewives series on Bravo, which in some ways is more interesting, at least the Bravo version. So I don't know. I'm excited. I like this stuff. All right, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, what are you watching?
So Alex and I got to go to a premiere this week for a new Netflix film. It's actually going to be out next week, folks, but I want to give you an early heads up on this. It's called Noms with Vince Vaughn, Susan Sarandon. It's based on an Italian restaurant out of Staten Island. A real guy who set up this restaurant there with Italian nonas, Italian grandmothers, cooking, a group of them. And it's become very big over time. They've made a film based on it on Netflix. Thought the film was like very cute, very like it warms your heart. These grandmothers and the restaurant and the storyline here. And so early heads up on Nonas on Netflix. Again, premieres next weekend, but it was on my mind.
Moshe, I have seen Instagram posts about this restaurant that uses the grandmothers. And it's one of those things where I'm like, is this even true? You don't never know with what you're seeing on social media if it's real or not.
Let me tell you why we know it's true. Mike Zeusel's been there, Jill Wagner. Friend of the pod, Mike Zeusel, who, by the way, just like did Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Mike Zeusel's our friend. For those of you unfamiliar with Mike Zeusel, Zeusel is at like 189 countries that he's traveled to. He has got like 4 left or 3 left or something after this trip that he just went. And I'm like, dude, are you in Kashmir right now? Because like stuff is going down there in Pakistan. He's like, I'm okay, man. I'm okay. Like, all right. So anyway, needless to say, he's also traveled to these places domestically. So he went to the Nonas, which is very difficult to get into because it's this very small place in Staten Island where the grandmothers cook for you. But now you don't have to get in there and follow Zeusel literally to Nonas. You can watch the film on Netflix.
Right. So Alex, your wife, had posted about it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this place is actually real. Okay, cool. I probably won't make it there, but I'll watch the film about it.
You can stream it and order local Italian in Long Island. Jill, what are you watching?
So Conan O'Brien was honored with the Kennedy Center's Mark Twain Prize for American Humor. And the ceremony is for comedians by comedians. So along with speeches, there's a lot of roasting. Netflix is going to be airing the event, and there's tons of big name comedians: Nikki Glazer, Will Ferrell, David Letterman, Tracy Morgan, Adam Sandler. I could go on, but certainly will be funny.
So that will be on Netflix starting on Sunday. I read on May the 4th.
And now that you say May 4th, we are big Star Wars. Well, I'm not, but my husband is, and he's gotten my daughter really into Star Wars. So they are going to watch Star Wars.
Yeah, from May the 4th be with you, everybody. Early heads up. But, the Star Wars people are already aware of it. They wait for this. This is a holiday every year for them. Jill, what are you reading?
So an op-ed in the New York Times caught my eye. It's from John McWhorter. It's called, "It is one of the things I always hated about cities, and I've decided it's just fine." So I was like, what? Of all of the things that you could hate about a city, is he possibly referring to? And it is hearing people play their cell phones without headphones or earbuds, and then hearing people complain about it.
This is very controversial, Jill. People, we've talked about this at airports and airplanes, like increasingly people who are just putting their phones on speaker and watching videos in public, and whether that's become socially acceptable.
I think that the more people that do it, it's kind of like it all cancels each other out in a way. I'm not doing it, but I think, it does bother me less, I think. All right, Moshe, what are you reading?
There's a story in the Wall Street Journal, Jill, out of Colton, California. This is a town near San Bernardino, and they're having a fight over donkeys, the burros of Colton, California. Apparently there's like wild donkeys in the West. And so there's a group of people who want to get rid of the wild donkeys. They're the people who love the burros, love the donkeys. And they're like, bring back the donkeys. They're getting rid of a couple hundred donkeys. They're like, bring us back our donkeys. But like, it's led to traffic accidents, people hitting donkeys, causing a lot of damage. And so there's a donkey fight happening in Colton, California. And the Wall Street Journal has a fun little piece about it.
Okay, Moshe, what are you eating?
Jill, drum roll, Cincinnati. I'm eating Grater's ice cream, of course. Black cherry chip. Got to do it every time I'm here. Have you had Grater's, Jill?
No, I've never even heard of it.
It's a thing here.
All right, well, you would know. You're Mr. Ice Cream. That's your thing.
It is. It is among my various titles. I'm like Marco Rubio. I'm the news guy.
Mr. Ice Cream.
I'm Mr. Ice Cream.
News.
I'm the interim. I host the podcast. Go on and on. Jill, let's end this. What are you eating this weekend?
So I'm going to a matcha-inspired brunch in honor of National Matcha Day. It is hosted by my friend Dana Pollock of Dana's Bakery at the New York City restaurant Jack's Wife Frida.
Oh, Jack's Wife Frida. They got multiple locations now. Jack's Wife Frida keeps, she's popular, that Frida.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. We do appreciate it.
We appreciate all of you going through another week with us. We have a special premium pod out for the premium listeners on all things Canada. A deep dive. We got a workshop coming up for premium listeners. So if you're interested in all of our extra content and getting your questions answered about the news, what are you waiting for? Join Mo News Premium over at mo.news/premium. You can get a 2-week free trial to check it out. 99% of people stay, though. They like it.
They can't quit us, Moshe.
They can't quit us. They can't quit us. So join the party. You know you won't be able to quit. The news party. But with a side of fun. And a side of Grater's ice cream out of Cincinnati.
All right, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.